note before we get started. This conversation, I had an issue with the video recording, so it's going to be auditory only. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Michael Duke. Dr. Duke, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited about our conversation.
I am too. Yeah, and it's been a while since you and I talked. Well, you used to be my professor back in grad school.
You still turned out okay anyway.
I hope so. I guess the verdict is still out on that. I could still go down the toilet, but for now,
We're all a work in progress.
yeah, exactly. So, and now, at that time, this was in Memphis, but now you live in Northern California, and you do a lot of work
Mhm.
around like homelessness and employment. Do you want to talk about what you do now?
Yeah, sure. I'm at the University of California, San Francisco, mostly in the Department of Medicine. And the work that I'm doing is looking at, the really huge issue, well, in California, but elsewhere, around housing and homelessness. I'm an ethnographer, an anthropologist, and so I'm really interested in understanding the interface between how people on the ground are kind of experiencing housing precarity, loss of housing, challenges they face in navigating the system in order to obtain housing again, those kinds of things. So I've been doing that for about 5 years. The center that I work for at UCSF is the Benioff Homelessness and Housing Initiative. And so, yeah, most recent, well, not that recently, but maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we completed the largest study of homelessness in the US since the 1990s. It was a
Oh,
really
wow.
large study with a representative sample of unhoused folks in the state of California, representing the different regions of California, I should say.
Hmm.
And there were we surveyed maybe close to around 3,200 people, something like that. And in addition to that, or in hand with that, we did qualitative interviews on a range of topics with folks, including um, behavioral health issues, the challenges that people face to get rehoused, the unique experiences of Black and Latinx folks who are unhoused, those kinds of things. And so we ended up having around 365 qualitative interviews.
Wow.
And as you can imagine, when you do qualitative research, you just end up with like reams and reams of material, and we're still we're still mining that data because it's a huge undertaking.
Yeah, this seems like very important work. It seems like you're adding a lot of people's stories to some of this survey data for homeless people. What if
Yeah,
yeah, what have you been learning so far? Maybe at a high level, like what kind of factors have you found contribute to homelessness or seem to relate to homelessness in people's stories?
yeah. I mean, there isn't one particular thing. I mean, the overarching kind of explanation for homelessness, especially in California, is just the lack of availability of housing in general, and and housing costs. So that is a big issue. But there also, you know, just in our country, in the United States, I should say, our social safety net is so what's the opposite of robust? Frail, fragile. Um, that it's very easy for people to fall through the cracks. I mean,
Mm,
a lot of the work that I've been doing recently focuses on um, employment, unemployment, and as a pipeline for people becoming unhoused. And there are complex reasons for that, but it does tie into just the cost of housing. I mean, even you know, I mean, all of us in California and probably many other states are really only like 2 or 3 paychecks away from being unhoused ourselves, right? And the ability to have a substantial cushion to keep yourself afloat I mean, is a middle class phenomenon, but even as a middle class phenomenon, that's really not the case for most people. So that aspect of of job loss, injury, or accidents that happen on the job, resulting in housing homelessness. I mean, the other issue is maybe kind of a little bit California specific, is that at least in certain regions of the state, there were people who were victims of wildfires, right? And
Mm,
so, in theory, there are things like with FEMA in place to help people get back on their feet, but for complicated reasons, for many people that we talked to, that wasn't the case. And so, people went from being housed to unhoused really in kind of a blink of an eye. We're still a little bit shell shocked about like what happens next to them.
mm. Yeah, this makes sense. I mean, that would be a true horror story to just have your house burn down and then now be in a situation where you're stuck in an unhoused situation for an extended period of time. And it seemed like also some of the people's stories. I mean, sometimes they struck me as a bit. There could be a sadness to some of the stories in the article of yours that I read, like somebody that worked for many years was about to retire, was either a couple months or like a year or two from retirement, and then their employer just laid them off, and seemingly so that they didn't have to pay for retirement. And then they ended up homeless, or somebody who their job just fell apart or was providing care, and for an aged loved one who died, and then they were living at that home, and then suddenly they couldn't live there anymore, and they didn't have their income, and they were unhoused. Yeah, what have you learned in all this process, kind of listening to or interviewing people and hearing all these stories?
Yeah, well, you're certainly right. I mean, to hone in on the sadness. I mean, there's no getting around the fact that being unhoused is no joke, and whether people, it's a gradual process by which people become unhoused. Like you start, like, or whether it happens suddenly, it's still something that people end up feeling a little bit blindsided about. I
Hmm.
mean, there are people that you lose your job, or you had some kind of an accident that required you to pay money for medical care, and then you could like maybe you can sleep on people's couches, your friends and things like that, which is technically legally unhoused, but people still feel like they have a grip on or a pathway to prevent homelessness, but then they end up you wear out your welcome or you can't stay there forever and then you end up unhoused anyway. The reason I was mentioning that sometimes the descent into homelessness is rapid, like with people that natural disasters, things like that. But sometimes it's really slow. Like so, one of the things that really surprised me, and maybe it shouldn't have, were the number of people who lost everything during the recession in 2005 and were never able to kind of get back on their feet after that. Like there would be like periods where they'd be able to kind of scrape something together and kind of keep it going, and then fall back into homelessness. And so some of these kinds of economic um, prop, eras that we've had, have a long tail. I guess is the point. And so um, we all need to be kind of mindful of that. I mean, once something like that falls out of the headlines, the idea is like, well, okay, people will figure out some way to get back on their feet, and that sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's not.
Yeah, yeah, this makes total sense. That was actually something I did want to ask from your study. I don't know, because maybe in the form of interview, because you interview people who are currently unhoused, maybe you don't look at this as much. But I was curious as to what extent the people you talk to are like unhoused for an extended period of time, whether they're homeless and kind of caught in that cycle for a while, or if they're kind of in a like they're currently homeless and then when you talk to them, but maybe a couple months later they get back on their feet.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a combination, but generally speaking, the people that we talk to, again, I mean, when we talk to people, because these were not longitudinal interviews,
Right.
we kind of parachuted in, talked to them, and that's the end of it. But most of the people that we talked to didn't really feel like that they had a way forward. Like in other words, there wasn't like, well, in 2 or 3 weeks, I'm going to be getting a housing voucher and we're moving on. There were some people who said that, but in those cases, people sometimes, especially in large urban areas, would have housing vouchers, but they weren't able still to buy an apartment, because there were landlords would accept the vouchers, those kinds of things. Transportation was an issue. And so, yeah, I'm sure, or I hope, at least some of the people that we talked to have managed to kind of get back on their feet. But at least at the point when we spoke with them, most of them didn't really have a clear path forward.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense, and I hope they have been able to figure themselves out, but I guess time will tell with that.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, me
um,
too.
yeah, the other thing with what you were talking about, you allude to a bunch of different kind of structural factors. High cost of housing. You talked about employment and some changes in employment. You talked about COVID. You talked about these vouchers and whether they work or, and like being able to provide government-based assistance. Yeah, and it seems like from what you were saying before, it's like many of the people kind of are holes falling through the cracks. That you have these multiple filters, and that might catch people and allow them to have the resources to have a home, whether that's like a job, their family, social support, government assistance. But there's certain people that just fall through all those cracks for whatever reason. I guess structurally, yeah, what are some of the biggest factors, and do you think we're seeing like a shift in some of these holes getting larger, and these factors getting bigger, or more of a big deal?
Well, I think it depends. These are great questions, and they're important policy questions. I mean, on the one hand, at least in California, there is this big push, which has its pros and cons of rapidly building as much housing as possible. And we can talk about that. With ideas that at some point down the road, things cost of housing will start to come down. People will won't have to struggle so much for housing, etc. The other issue is, I mean, to be honest, really at the federal level, there's just not much interest in the kinds of long-term solutions that would actually reduce homelessness. I mean, we're seeing it, in very dramatic fashion in Washington D.C. I'm actually a Washington D.C. native myself, and and the National Guard coming in and like getting rid of encampments and things like that, which have tremendous negative impacts on unhoused folks, and often like pushes them back to square one in terms of getting housed. And so the kind of punitive approach seems to be something that's getting a little bit of traction, but the issue is, I mean, you're punishing people because of the fact that they don't have shelter, and there is a myth that if most people who are unhoused don't want to have housing, and that is 100% not the case. But a lot of times they want to have housing in a way that kind of respects their autonomy. And so, one of the things that really stood out, and you hear this in other parts of the country, is that a very large portion of unhoused people who live outside have pets. And you can kind of imagine why. They offer protection, they offer unconditional love, and people treat those animals like better than many. I've heard many stories of people going without food themselves so that they can have food for their dog, for example. So if a lot of places don't allow you to have a pet, it's like for them, it's like, well, that's a non-starter. And if I can't have my dog with me, then there's no point. So, and a lot of the kind of shelters, the shelter system is not here. There's a reason why a lot of people choose not to stay in congregate shelters, right? I mean, partly because of this issue with animals, partly because of perception that they're unsafe, partly because what there's not really a place for their possessions. People have stuff, and in some ways that's having material objects is kind of their connection to something apart from their current situation. And so for all these kind of reasons, I mean, those are the types of cases where people, you know, it's understandable why people get frustrated and they see people living in tents on city streets and stuff, but people have really good reasons why they don't want to go into shelters, other than the idea that, like, I like living outside, this is great for me, which is certainly not the case.
Yeah, this makes total sense. I mean, from the I could see like having a dog and not wanting to be in not like a place that doesn't facilitate dogs. It seems like a lot of these resources aren't necessarily actually built to solve the needs of people who are homeless, unfortunately, of like actual people on the streets. Um, what what impact has the the provocations of the with the of break of the federal government coming in and breaking up in some of the cities in California, breaking up some of the homeless encampments. I don't know if that's the right word, but like those homeless communities. Um, what impact is that having on the individuals? You're saying it kind of sends them back to square one. To yeah, how do people in the unhoused community respond to that?
Yeah, well, I guess a couple of things. I mean, one is this isn't the kind of sweeps and things like that are not really strictly a federal
Mm-hmm.
issue. I mean, even here in California, I mean, just the kind of political tide is shifting away from supporting unhoused people. You know, because voters are like, what, why can't we do something about this? There's squalor everywhere, that kind of thing. So even here in California, you know, the state is taking a pretty hard line on encampments in a way that they weren't before. But the reason why sweeps are so pernicious is a couple of reasons. I mean, one is that, you know, if you see a group of tents or an encampment, um, those, they're challenging in many ways. The people who live there sometimes are challenging, but they're a community, and people over time, you develop networks of social support, mutual help, that kind of thing, to keep you together, basically.
Mm.
People who will watch your stuff if you have a doctor's appointment, or people who will, keep an eye out for you, especially if you're a woman in an encampment. To be honest, like, the risk of sexual assault is not zero. It's an issue, and so having allies who will kind of watch your back is
Mm.
super important. And if an encampment breaks up, then it's almost like the deck is reshuffled, and like suddenly you're in another place. I don't know these people. Like, now I'm
Mm.
starting over again.
Mm.
People kind of spread to the winds. The other issue which happens, surprising amount, is so one of the things that one of the an important barrier for people getting rehoused is not having the necessary documents, things like social security cards and birth certificates and driver's licenses. When these sweeps happen, often those things are just thrown away. So people will, have those materials with them, with the idea that, like, okay, now I've got my stuff, my documentation together, I can kind of try to make the next step, and they get thrown away. Likewise, people's medications get thrown away in these kind of sweeps,
Mm.
because if you ever see footage of them, I mean, they really are just like, people come in and they like pick up tents and tarps and whatever else is inside those tents, and just kind of put them into a dumpster, basically. And so things that are really important to them, like their medication, documents, they get lost. And then there's, of course, psychologically. I mean, the fact that, however challenging it is to live in an encampment, you have some sense of community that's just been broken apart, and then you have to kind of start over again.
Mm. Yeah, this makes total sense. I could see all of those. I mean, it seems like these are supportive communities. Like if you also came into my home, even if these camps are not like legal residences, they are where people are and where they keep their stuff. Um, if you came into my home and just started taking everything, I probably a bunch of stuff would go missing, a bunch of stuff would get
Yeah,
broken.
yeah, sure.
There'd be a lot of destruction there. Um, if What this reminds me of is I remember in Sao Paulo at one point I was walking down the street. I was walking like to a museum, kind of classic touristy thing. Going, it was actually a pretty cool museum about the like political violence under the dictatorship in Brazil. Another
Mhm.
conversation. But on the way there, I get off at the bus. It's like a 5 or 10 minute walk to the museum, and I'm walking down the street, and on the other side of the street was a, I don't know if they were specifically unhoused, but it looked like kind of a camp of some kind of drug users. Like they were kind of all hanging out. They were all kind of doing something. I could see the needles. They were using something. Um, and as I'm walking by, like a couple police officers come to them, stop, basically run the siren, stop right in front of them. They say something in Portuguese, and everyone gets up, and they all, it's like basically they like kick them out. And but what actually happened is they all went 3 blocks away, and coincidentally the same way I was going. So now they're all walking in the same direction I'm walking. But like they all go like 3 blocks away and sit back down. And it was like, okay, they're gonna clear everything right here. Like the police are gonna like forcibly, close it down here, and then it just kind of gets rebuilt right over there. It becomes a type of whack-a-mole. And for them, I wonder, like, I didn't really talk to them. I didn't speak the same language, but like I wonder if this was like a regular part of their experience of like it felt a little routine. Like, oh,
Mhm.
we can't be here, so now we go a couple blocks away and hang out. And it was like the normal, like it was almost like the normal violence of like the normal, like the police come and kick us out, and then we come here, and then this is how we settle. This is what you're saying kind of reminds me of. I don't know if people's experiences in the U.S. in California are anywhere near the same, but this is what it reminds me of.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you close an encampment, people literally have to go someplace. Like, I mean, one of the things that that was really fascinating when because we have a bunch of our reports online, so any of your viewers or listeners are more than welcome to check them out. But what surprised the statistic that surprised and the most people and that we got the most pushback for was pushing back against a myth. And so the myth, at least in California, is that, well, of course, we have a lot of homeless people in California. The weather's nice, like, look, you can go here, it's not too cold. Like, so all these people from like Wisconsin and Minnesota, they're all coming here and living on the streets. When we did that, unfortunately, I don't have the statistic in front of me, but the vast, vast majority of people who we surveyed, their last residence was in California, and this a clear majority were native Californians who were born in the state, and even a large portion of them lived in the county, like like for example, we've been to a couple of encampments that were like in the middle of neighborhoods, and at first we're like, oh, the neighbors aren't gonna like that, but the people who are in house there, they all grew up in that neighborhood, and so like when we were there, there was a barbecue, and like people in the neighborhood were coming in, and these were people they went to high school with, and so forth. So the point is that these, whether you like it or not, these are your neighbors, kind of, and
Hmm.
you know, but there is this kind of myth that at least in California, like, well, look, we'll just get a bunch of bus tickets, send them back to Wisconsin, and that's the end of it. And California is their own. I mean, it makes no intuitive sense that like, I'm unhoused in Minnesota, where at least I know people, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to go to California where I don't know a single person because the weather is nice, and that this feels like, when you step back, the logic of that just doesn't seem to fly. But it's a myth that's just really hard to shake here, and people were really upset about that, and that statistic, and were saying you must have gotten it wrong or whatever. But we just asked people straight up, like, where were you living before this, and where were you born, and that kind of
Yeah, this makes total sense. I could definitely see that. Well, yeah, why would you completely shift communities if you want to get back on your feet? And as a quick side, I think anyone who thinks that people go to California because the weather's warm, um, Clearly they haven't been to San Francisco. I feel
Yeah,
like that's probably one of in my experience, it's one of the places with the highest, that broad area is the highest homelessness population, and it's the coldest of the major cities in the state.
it's pretty chilly, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Although the homeless situation, I mean, since you bring up San Francisco, that and that's been getting a lot of media attention, especially from Republicans and so forth. But like the homeless population, it really is limited to a fairly, like a 5 or 6 square blocks or 7 square blocks. Is it intensive? Yes, but much of the city, it's uncommon to see unhoused people. So yeah, I mean, I'm just putting that out there as a thing. The other thing is, if people are coming to California for the weather, I thought what you were going to say was like they've never been to Fresno in July, where it's like 105 degrees and stuff. So,
well, that's the other side.